you, James, for that very kind introduction, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is my privilege to come here and talk to you about the youth and what that means for the investors. It's not only just a long-term passion of mine, it's also highly relevant to what we do on a daily basis, which will become very evident throughout this talk. But before that, if I may, I would love to start with a story. When I was in elementary school, or primary school, all the kids in my class were going crazy over this little gaming machine called the Game Boy. So some of you might even remember this little device to my left. It's about this big, has 5 simple buttons, and you play on a black and white screen simple games like Tetris. And I remember sitting at the dining room table and talk to my parents about this amazing gaming machine and all the games we could play. And my dad, who is a local professor at an engineering school and also an amateur trader, sneered at the idea. And he said, before you even know it, all the kids will go back to fighting over books. And this thing is a little fad. And this event is significant to me for 3 reasons. One, this is the first time in my very young life that I remember that I saw a pattern that even the smartest adult I know in the whole world missed. All the kids move on to better games and better gaming machines, and 30 years later, my dad is still sitting there waiting for them to go back to books. The second significance is it's the first time I connected what I observe as a pattern to a stock. And this little stock is a Japanese company called the Nintendo, and the stock has gone up 500% since the Game Boy. And then the last one, which I didn't quite understand until I was much older, was why my dad missed the trend. It's not because this is some weird young kids thing that he didn't understand. What he didn't see is that Game Boys for my generation mean the same thing as books for theirs. So my dad grew up in the Cultural Revolution, where they banned and burned books. Any books as a kid, if you could get your hands on, that's not a textbook, is hugely exciting, novel, even Daredevil. Now fast forward to the 90s. As a child, this is the first time that we play the same game as kids in Japan and the US. This is the first international game we ever got our hands on. So it's every bit as exciting, novel, and Daredevil as books back in the Cultural Revolution. Now, this insight actually remains highly relevant even today. When we look at the young consumers, we think the first thing is to look at the human needs and look at the same human emotional yearning. So, how many of you use Instagram or Tencent's WeChat? Show of hands. Great. You're in good company. 2 billion people log onto these services on a monthly basis. How many of you think it's just new apps that waste time on the smartphone? Probably some. But I would argue if you really see these services beyond what they are on the surface, which is applications on their smartphone, and look at them for what they are, they're really just a human way of telling stories via pictures. And isn't this practice as old as time? Whether it's carved on the side of a cave or sent through a smartphone, one picture is worth 1,000 words because they're emotional, they're intuitive, they transcend national and linguistic barriers, and they're deeply human. Now, I'm not even going to ask the audience how many of you think video games are a complete waste of time. But if you have been to one of these esports events, as I had, and this is when hundreds of thousands of people gather and watch top video gamers play against each other, the atmosphere in that room is every bit as riveting and electrifying as the AFL game. And then if you look below that surface, isn't the need for competition, for community, for belonging to a team also very core to the fabric of a human? So if you don't take away anything else from this presentation today, and just one thing, is when we look at the youth, let's not mystify these young consumers as something that's a novel creature that nobody understands. Let's look at the humans behind the screens. So that's easier said than done, especially when we look at faraway countries, different cultures. For me, one of the simplest things to ask is actually a simple question, which is, what do these consumers not have? and what is the unfulfilled need. So let me give you an example. There is this Chinese app called Momo, and it's spelled as M-O-M-O. And in Chinese, it literally means strangers. This is an app where strangers find another stranger, maybe within 1 kilometer, to him or her physically, connect, talk for hours. So at first, this might be a bizarre product and very hard to analyze. But when we ask the question, what do these young people not have? Well, what they don't have is pubs, churches, community centers. So when you put yourself in the shoes of this most likely migrant worker, and there are hundreds of millions of them, they're far away from home, they're in a strange city, they don't have any of the natural social networks. What do? The basic yearning to connect is human, and they go online. So that's 100% natural. So let's look at another phenomenon, delivery. So this could be e-commerce, which is products delivered to your doorstep, or services, which is food delivery. Roughly in Asia, this is getting to become 20% of the total market. And we think this could go to 30 or 40%. So why is delivery so much bigger in Asian countries? Well, what do they not have? They don't have time. They don't have time to be stuck in traffic for hours waiting for a gallon of milk. So entrepreneurs send out fleets of these little riders, and they weave through traffic, and they deliver product and services to consumers' doorstep. So to us, this becomes a fundamental question. What do they not have? And that helps us explain a lot of the behavior and phenomenon. Besides these two that I talked about, some of these other general phenomena we're observing is local champions are really growing up and give the multinational companies a run for their money. So we're seeing much more local winners than before. Algorithm is easy, data is hard, and data depository is becoming very concentrated on two platforms, and that's Tencent and Alibaba. And finally, authenticity is key. Consumers are armed with a smartphone with 10 social networks. They sniff out inauthentic communications very quickly. So these trends are all great, but investors still have to find companies to invest in to really benefit from these trends. At Cooper Investors, we are big fans of companies that are what we call young at heart. And what does that mean? A youthful mentality in the company tends to translate into a culture of humility, innovation, and vigilance. So let me use one of my favorite companies, and we're a long-term investor in this stock, Tencent, as an example. Many of you might know Tencent as a $400 billion huge internet giant. But let me tell you the story of Tencent. It started 20 years ago as a very humble mobile messenger, and this is a free mobile messenger in the city of Shenzhen. Every 3 to 4 years, this little company somehow managed to add something that's completely new to its business. So mobile messenger first, a few years later is community, then they developed desktop gaming, then they developed advertising, and they developed mobile gaming. So how did Tencent manage to do it? When we look at globally, the only company that paralleled their ability to change is probably Microsoft. We think the key is a culture of humility and vigilance. When you speak to Tencent management, it is absolutely astonishing that this highly successful internet company still thinks any small startups could be the next competitor that's going to end this entire run. They are almost paranoid at competition, and as a result, they constantly disrupt themselves before they're disrupted. And we think the key of building this kind of culture is the founder. So Tencent is still led by this founder, Pony Ma, and he is so obsessed with the product that when he developed the first product of mobile messenger, he actually met his wife on the first mobile messenger that Tencent created, and they were still married today. So it's a tremendous story of how he really became the human connection between products and its consumers. And we actually see this kind of founder everywhere in Asia. Take the example of the CEO or co-founder of HDFC Bank, the most successful private bank in India. This founder would travel to thousands of villages in India to really understand the rural need for banking. And then fast forward to China, the most successful domestic sportswear company, Anta. The founder similarly traveled to 2,000 stores in 3 years to understand how to better its stores. So founder-led companies is where we find sort of a rich source of these type of companies. Finally, is it a coincidence that we just happened to stumble across these amazing companies in Asia? I don't think it's a coincidence. After all, 60% of the young people in the world live in Asia. So the companies in Asia, they really grow up serving these young consumers, and they get used to serving their consumers' ever-changing life cycle and needs. They're not afraid of hiring young people. The average employee age at Tencent and Alibaba is still below 30 years of age. To conclude, the world is going to the young people whether or not we like it. Whether or not there's a trade war or some kind of geopolitical risk, millennials is going to be 70% of the workforce globally in the next 5 years. They're going to decide how to live their lives, what to buy, and what services to use. They're also going to become the new guardians of capital and wealth. We think to understand them, one have to look at the human needs and human emotions. One have to find companies that are young at heart, and finally back the culture of humility and vigilance. Thank you.